Dear friends, this is the 5th day of Südwind's session as part of the Human Rights Council meeting. And the subject of our today's session is on human rights defenders in Iran. The first speaker is Mr. Ahmad Rafat. He is journalist, writer, and a human rights defender and activist. He is the head of the Press and Security ISF organization, and he is the head of the Italian journalists, and he's been a journalist, a war journalist for the past 23 years ago in a journal called Tiempo. He has his BA in psychology, and he's a graduate from the University of Frankfurt. He will start speaking about the reprisal of civil society activists in Iran. You may start. Greetings to all of you who are present here and all the friends who are following us through internet. And my gratitude to Südwind for having organized this event and this very interesting event, and they're allowing us to get together and to sit around the table and to talk about Iran as experts and get to know better the situation in Iran. My speech or my talk will be about the pressure that is the civil society has been suffering always actually in Iran from the very beginning of the revolution in Iran. After the first few months after the revolution, the civil society has been under incredible pressure, and this process has gone on until the date. And in the past few years, this pressure has been increased. And if we want to just look at what has happened in the past few weeks and just to talk about it in a general way, then we can talk about the Darawish, the dervishes who are from Qonabadi, a number of their lawyers, 9 of them actually, 9 lawyers who have taken on the defense of these dervishes. They are now under incredible pressure. They've been arrested 3 years, and they've been sentenced to 7 to 10 years of prison. And this group has been protesting against the humiliation they've suffered and the destruction of their the gatherings where they would get together and they would have their meetings there. And in these protests, they were arrested and they were sentenced, and many times they've been under hunger strike. And lately, other members of these dervishes, this group, they have asked themselves and also their family members. They've approached the judiciary and they've been trying to speak to the officials. They have had actually a group of them have got together and they were protesting in a very peaceful way, but unfortunately they were oppressed by the government officials, and 50 of them, as a result of this attack by the government officials, were arrested, and 50 of them were injured, and 470 of them were arrested in a few hours in Tehran. After a few hours they were released, but because they wanted to prevent them from going into other kind of protest, they released them immediately after that, and they actually arrested them and put them in different detention centers around the city so that they will not have more people protesting against what has happened to them. And so this is one of the examples from which you can see what is the civil society is going through in Iran. But also, if you want to look at what has happened lately in Iran, we will see that a number of people were arrested as a result of because they were attending a volleyball match between Iran and Italy, and a group of women, because they're not allowed to go to these kind of shows, they can't go and see sports, and they, for example, they've allowed Brazilian women, for example, to go and see the match, or other foreign women, they were allowed to go and see it, but not Iranians. And so a group of women were very peacefully standing there in front of the place where this match was taking place, and in a peaceful way they were protesting against that. And they said, how come all the foreigners can actually go and see these matches, but we can't go? And a number of these women were arrested, and after a few hours they were released. But one of these people who were arrested, who was half British, half Iranian, she has been imprisoned for the past 2 months because she has very peacefully objected and protested against what is happening. And after 2 months, we still don't know what is she being accused of, where is she being detained, and why she is not allowed to have a lawyer defending her, or even to have first session talks, or basically to get to know her. And basically the need of any person who is detained who is arrested is to have a lawyer. This is within the rights, but unfortunately she was deprived of that. And you know that in Press TV, for example, one of the English speaking channels that we have in Iran, they oblige some arrested or detained people to come in these programs, and they force them to confess. And in this way they want to put pressure on these people, so they stop their activity. And if we want to continue and look at what has happened lately in Iran, we will see that a big number of activists, social activists, who are actually present in the social media in different cities in Iran, in Tehran and Shiraz and Kerman, they were arrested solely because they are active in the social media. They just present their views on different things that are happening. Number of these people who were arrested are women, and they were arrested, and by arresting them, and according to Reporters Without Borders, they said that Iran is currently the biggest prison for women journalists in the world. And we will talk about journalism, obviously, and we'll talk about the pressure. One of my friends here, colleagues here, will be talking about the journalist, Mr. Tajik. But the journalism is, or basically conveying the news, is one of the only instruments that this social or civil society has in order to talk or to convey a message to society, or to be present in society and be able to put people's desires and wishes towards the government. And unfortunately, we will see that many of this pressure is actually put on the journalists. Why? Because they will see that the journalists are the people who will talk about the violation of human rights. This is why we see the human rights reporter here. He actually talks about the different cases where journalists were being under severe pressure. And Mr. Ban Ki-moon, he's criticized the Iranian government, Mr. Rouhani's government, and says that since the time Mr. Rouhani has taken on the presidency of the country, the freedom of expression in Iran not only has not improved, but you can even say and declare that it's gone worse than before. And so obviously Mr. Ban Ki-moon and his declarations were actually received with great and severe negative reaction by Mr. Rouhani's office. And Mr. Mohammad Sadiqi, he has said, even when he meets with Mr. Ahmad Shahid, he seems to be very severe in the way he speaks and his verbal expression. He unfortunately, the language he used was not dignified for someone in his position, and he was very, very rude addressing Mr. Ban Ki-moon and his declarations. And I think that in itself is actually, I think, in the history of diplomacy in the world, we can say that no one has been so rude as this gentleman. He has accused Mr. Ban Ki-moon of interfering in the internal or domestic affairs of Iran, and he actually says that he actually wants to say that yes, but Mr. Ban Ki-moon can actually defend the rights of a group of people in some part of the world, but not in this part of the world. And so Mr. Ban Ki-moon, obviously, as the General Secretary of the United Nations, has the right to speak about any country and to talk about the situation of human rights in any country and to convey his opinion and his beliefs about this. If he can't do that, then there's no meaning for United Nations to exist at all as an organization that englobes and encircles all the countries of the world and gathers all the countries of the world and defends the rights of all the people in the world. And we see that Mr. Larijani, after that, he says that these he talks about, for example, the death sentences in Iran. He says that, for example, we know the statistics tells us clearly that before we get to the end of this date of this year, we know that Iran has the biggest number of executions in the country. So far in its history, it's never had so many people executed like this year. And Mr. Larijani, the head of the judiciary, says that this is part of our religious beliefs and no one is to interfere in that. And so they actually think that many people have thought that with the change in the government in Iran, then the situation will improve. Because as you know, in the 8 years of the presidency of Mr. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the situation was very bad and everyone was looking forward to this change. We know that the civil society in Iran was under severe pressure. Many people were arrested, many people were in prison, and there was a lot of limitations on freedom of expression. And for example, we know that one of the biggest problems that we had in the prisons in Iran is actually to fight against the AIDS illness in the prisons, and we've seen that we've seen that an NGO was established for this reason. Many of the founders of this NGO were actually arrested as a result of this initiative. In the time of Mr. Rouhani, all the international community's expectation was, in a way, that they thought that the situation will improve. He is moderate, something will change, but unfortunately, nothing has changed. Although we see that civil society in Iran is more active now than before. We know, for example, in the field of ecology, I know that some of the friends have actually talked about the situation of the ecologists in Iran and the climate change and healthy water and healthy atmosphere. It is one of the biggest arenas, or one of the biggest fields of civil society activism in Iran. They have been under a lot of pressure too. We see that Mr. Rouhani's presidency, we have not had so far anyone arrested as a result of their activism in ecology or in environmental issues. This has not happened in the time of Mr. Rouhani, but we see that many of the activists in Khuzestan or in Kurdistan, those who were activists in different campaigns related to environmental issues, they were actually accused for they were accused of different charges, and they were arrested and imprisoned, and these people are now serving their sentence in Ahvaz a few days ago. I remember that one of the activists, many times this person was actually very active when it comes to campaigns related to the water in Karun. And he was arrested together with a group of people, and they said that this person's activism is actually to create segregation and separation within the country, and he was accused of that, and not as a result of his activity in environmental issues. And so we see that during the presidency of Mr. Rouhani, the pressure has been much more on the activists. Mr. Rouhani, before he leaves Tehran to go to the opening sessions of the UN in New York, he had an interview done by CNN, and they asked him, what do you know about the arrest of Jason Rezaian, one of the American journalists who is now in prison, who is also imprisoned by his also together with his wife and two other people. What do you know? He was asked by a CNN journalist, what do you know about the arrest of these journalists? And we know that this news was actually we know that the person who was actually the owner of the house where these people were arrested was actually killed. It was not officially conveyed in the news, but this is a fact, and everyone knows that at the time of the arrest of these journalists, the owner of the building was killed. Mr. Rouhani, he answered, he says, in the whole world we have prisoners. There are prisoners in Iran like any other part of that. Maybe there are also some prisoners in Iran. I don't know what he means by maybe, when everyone in the whole international community talks about the journalists in Iran and talks about Iran as being the biggest prison for journalists in the world. And we have the lawyers who are prisoners. We have Baha'is who are in prison. We have the Darawish who are also in prison. We have all these different groups of people who are in prison. Or we have Mr. Rouhani. It's funny, he says that he doesn't even accept or acknowledges the arrest of people, the imprisonment of people as a result of their religious beliefs or their ideological beliefs. He said maybe there is a possibility. So it kind of conveys his doubt about this. And Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Karabu and Mrs. Ranawat, he says, yes, well, we don't know, maybe they are imprisoned also. But no one has told us, maybe, yes, they are present. And so when we talk about the activists in civil society, when we had such great hopes on this change, and we thought that something really good and positive would come as a result of Mr. Rouhani's taking on the office, we see that many of the friends who were activists in Iran, they say, many of the people who are alleged to the government, they say we have no way to defend you or to protect you because your activism actually is a hindrance for the success of our negotiations when it comes to the nuclear issues. So if you stop your activism in civil society, then we will definitely be successful in the nuclear negotiation table, because it has a direct link. What you do here in the country, it has a direct effect on the image of the Iranian government in the international community, and so you will have to stop your activism. And if we don't reach a positive conclusion or a positive result in these negotiations, then it will be the fault of these civil society activists. And there's one issue here, one point that I think is very important that I would like to raise here, and maybe Mrs. Dr. Abadi will talk about it in her message, but allow me to also say it here, is that in a society where the lawyers, those who are actually the defenders of those whose rights were violated, if this group of people are actually sentenced to many years of prison, like Mrs. Sotoudeh, Thank God Mrs. Sotoudeh now is out of prison as a result of Mr. Rouhani's trip to New York and the pressure that it was exerted on him. But Mr. Saifzadeh and other people, all these friends who are in prison, 7, 8, 9 years prison, a society that cannot actually have the defenders of their rights to be free and to be able to do their work, because this lawyer, all the lawyers actually who have had cases of human rights violations, they were either obliged to leave the country or they are right now imprisoned. Many of those who had very important political cases, for example, some people like Mrs. Sotoudeh, she was, her license was revoked and she was imprisoned. And in the committee that was in charge of Mrs. Sotoudeh, they told her that your license is revoked, and they said that, well, you know, the Bar Association is the one that has the authority to do that. They actually corrected themselves. But it's very interesting to point out at the fact that the Bar Association itself is not independent, and the Parliament is actually now about to pass a law that takes independence from these Bar Association. All the courts and all the bar associations, the local ones and the national one, will be under the control and the authority of the government, and so that very little independence that these lawyers have will be taken from them. And so this will be a big drawback for law and lawyers in the country, and obviously as a result of that it will affect the situation of those people who don't feel that their rights are being respected. And so the independence of these lawyers, that goes back to the time of Dr. Mossadegh's time. It has been taken by the Islamic Republic of Iran and Mr. Larijani's initiatives and activities, obviously. But if you want to look at the civil society's activities, the same way that I mentioned to you, they're very active people who are working in non-stop, and we can see that many of the organizations that work on environmental issues, for example, we can see that in the last few years the regional government has approached these NGOs. They've taken away their license from doing certain campaigns, and they've actually put pressure on them. They wanted to control their projects and their campaigns, and this has resulted in limiting the work and the activities of not only this group but also the other activists, because the other activists will see that, you know, in a field like environmental issues, something that is not clearly not political, they are under so much pressure. You can imagine how it will be in the social areas. If we see that, for example, there are other kind of things that happen in the country, for example, the killing of people in the border, we see that this is nothing related to social or political or environmental issues. We see that, for example, trafficking things in Iran is actually not illegal as such. These people actually they just get their material or their product from them, and they actually the people themselves who do this illegal activity are not being arrested or detained by the government. And we see how every month many of these people are killed. They're not even judged or arrested or detained, they're just being killed. Sometimes they are arrested. At least in some countries, these people are arrested. They actually get all their products from them, and they go to court. But in Iran, they don't actually do that. They directly kill these people. And so if we look into other issues related to civil society, when we look at the past 2 years, we look at the area of Azerbaijan, we can see that some activists who were there, who have organized their NGOs, they were arrested and they were accused, not because of what they've done in their social activism, but because of their cultural activities that they have carried out. And they were arrested and sentenced 5 to 7 years. And so the civil society in Iran, if you look at it in any kind of, from any kind of angle, they are under severe pressure, and they always, we see that, if you remember just a few days, we saw this group of people, young people who were using the song "Happy," and they recorded themselves while they were dancing. Well, they were just sentenced to 6 months of prison and 92 lashes, and they were accused of making this video, a video that was actually made and done in different kind of versions by all over the world. I went and actually saw the videos that were recorded in Islamic countries, 170 videos or video clips of this song, some countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and none of them, the participants were not arrested, they were not accused of anything, they were not sentenced to anything. And so any kind of activity that an Iranian does that is, if it's not according to the wishes of those who make the laws in the country, then they know that they will be prosecuted and they will be sentenced. And you know, many laws in Iran are not clear, and they are open for interpretation. And so because of these, the lack of a clear law and a clear definition of these laws, then those who are in charge of judging, then they interpret the laws as they wish, and they create their own punishment for these accusations. And what the government thinks, when they look at the civil society, they actually fear them much more than the political activities of the political parties. Why? Because we don't have political parties in Iran. They're not allowed to have any activities. Any kind of gathering is actually threatening for the government, and the government is very fearful that this gathering will actually mean something. It will actually threaten their stability. And so if we want to have an example of that, we can look at the trade unionist. We see, for example, the activists of these unions, they were sentenced to lashes because they just actually organized a meeting for unionists to get together and to discuss certain issues in Tehran, in a big company. And we see that trade unionists in different parts of the country are actually they are right now serving sentence because they had organized some activities for groups of professionals. And the government looks at them as a group that can actually threaten the stability. And it's amazing. You have another group that are the teachers who are actually teaching students who are for and against the government. They are just actually do the work. They are a group of people who want to improve the conditions of their students. Then you will be surprised to know that 7 teachers are right now in prison. They were arrested, and some of them were actually ill, and they had some infections while they were in prison. Well, you would be surprised to know that some teachers and some directors of these schools were actually handcuffed and chained. They actually were taken to the hospital, and they were chained to the bed of the hospitals. And we have one of the spokesperson of the teacher trade unionist. He was arrested and he was taken to hospital, and it's amazing to see him chained to prison. And I think it's amazing. I think the international community will be shocked to know these facts. It's not acceptable, not only by the international, not acceptable by the Iranian standard, by Iranian society standard, but it should not be acceptable by the international community standards, because it has to do with a sense of humanity, with our sense of dignity and humanitarian principles. And I'm very grateful to all of you for having listened to me. Thank you so much.